we thought we'd start the session with some case studies to sort of just get the sort of flavours going on what museums have actually been doing in relating to catering. So I will start. The first case study is from the east of England, is Emma Harper, who was previously the manager for Mill Green Mill and Museum. And this case study is about extending their museum cafe and kitchen, working with a virtual school in Hertfordshire. So there's elements of training and improving the offer to the museums, but obviously, hopefully, also generating a little bit of income as well. But it's a really sort of slightly different take on how to develop your catering and cafe offer. So I will hand over to Emma. Hopefully, we'll see if we can get the presentation working. But
Thanks, Stephen. Can everyone see? I've started sharing. Can people see the presentation? Fabulous. Yes, so thanks. As Stephen said, my name's Emma Harper, and today I'm talking about a project at my previous work at Mill Green Mill and Museum in Hatfield and Hertfordshire, which is part of Welwyn Hatfield Borough Council. It consists of a restored 18th century working watermill and exhibition space in the old Miller's Cottage, and is accompanied by riverside gardens, and in which the setting is for the cafe. The project I'm talking about is called the Miller's Tea Room, and this was a partnership with something called the Virtual School, run by Hertfordshire County Council. So the Virtual School is not itself a teaching institution, but a way of bringing together information about children and young people who are looked after, so people who are in care, as if they were in a single school. So it means that the young people's progress can be closely tracked and supported with intervention targeted in a strategic way to support improved outcomes for them. And one of these long-running interventions is the Miller's Tea Room project at Mill Green. So as I say, it's a project aimed at looked after children generally aged 16 to 18. So they're at school leaving age, and they're starting to think about either higher education or getting a job and entering work experience. So, excuse me, the key aims of this project were really to give people a real life experience, practical experience of a workplace. And in this case, it was our museum cafe. It was to equip them with a range of hard and soft skills and build their confidence in taking their next steps into a more independent life. Essentially, the young people worked running our tea room in July and August during the Hertfordshire school summer holidays. They received food, hygiene, training and qualifications, training in using our EPOS till system and in meeting and greeting visitors, so customer service, taking their food orders, keeping the cafe clean and tidy. The young people were paid for this, so it was a paid role, which again leads into that work experience and real life skills. And I can come back to that a bit later. So historically, the museum cafe had only been open seasonally on Sunday afternoons and primarily run by volunteers. Working with the virtual school enabled the museum to extend the cafe's opening times to the Tuesdays and Thursdays when the museum was also open, so during the week time throughout the summer holidays. So that's obviously the busiest and most lucrative time for the museum. But we didn't have the staff resource to open the cafe normally at that time. Because the young people were there for a block of time, it also meant that we were able to expand the catering offer to include sandwiches and light snacks rather than just the cream teas which the volunteers used to prepare on a Sunday. So it provided somewhere for our visitors to enjoy some refreshment and thus extended dwell time at the museum overall, whilst also, of course, supporting young people and offering them a unique experience, which also chimes with the museum's social benefit aims. So it really was like a joint partnership with benefits for both. In late summer 2019, a part-time catering supervisor was appointed for 12 months at the museum to try and increase our out-of-season offer and opening times, partly as a result of the success that we'd seen with the virtual school project. So it provided statistics and evidence for the museum to say that the cafe was a viable option, even if it wasn't profitable as such. It was beneficial to the museum service. Unfortunately, we all know what happened shortly after that, which was the COVID pandemic, and that meant that we were unable to renew the position of the catering supervisor. And in addition, many of those volunteers who had been serving the cream teas on some Sundays didn't feel comfortable enough to return to volunteering in our small buildings, or, as we know, the whole landscape had changed. However, when we started to reopen our sites in May 2021, again, we were still on the Tuesday to Thursday at this point. We'd scrapped Sunday afternoons altogether. Our wonderful outdoor gardens allowed us to still go ahead with the virtual school project in the summer, but with certain restrictions in place, such as COVID testing for the young people, limited numbers working indoors, and visitors were ordering at the hatch and taking their cream teas away with them, or eating them in our gardens, socially distanced. It seemed even more vital to us that we were able to provide this experience for the young people that summer. And actually, I should have said our cafe is only outdoor seating in normal times, so that was a real benefit to us at this point. Once all restrictions had lifted by 2022, in my role as acting manager, I was looking at changing the opening times for the whole museum. So we changed to Thursday to Sunday all day, and we included opening the cafe on Saturdays and Sundays with dedicated weekend front of house staff running it. So again, using that sort of evidence of the virtual school that this was something that our visitors wanted, we were able to integrate that into our business plan. However, we still wanted to work with the virtual school team and see how this would affect the project. Obviously, then we would only be open 2 of the weekdays, and we felt that wasn't really enough experience to offer the young people. So we agreed that we could still run the cafe 3 weekdays, Wednesday to Friday, so covering our opening times, but also on a day where the museum and mill was closed, to try and encourage the local community to come down and just use the cafe. It also provided time for the virtual school to invite their partners and interested parties in the project to come down and experience it a bit more exclusively with the museum closed. So as I say, this all tied in nicely with our overall strategy post-COVID of trying to regenerate the site as a cultural community hub. Also, because we had started to do sandwiches and light snacks at the weekend, we worked with the virtual school to align the menu across all the opening days. In terms of logistics and budget, the virtual school project acted as a room hire. I think I might be on the wrong slide. Hang on a minute. No, I've just missed one out, don't worry. So in terms of logistics and budget, the virtual school acted as a room hire for the museum. So they were hiring our kitchen space effectively, which was needed during school time, during term time for school visits, but during the summer holidays, it was an empty space during the week. So that meant that at the end of the project, we would calculate the hire fee that we would normally charge, which I think at that point was £50 a day for about 24 days, and look at how much had been taken by the cafe on those weekday only, so when the virtual school was running it, and then the virtual school would then pay us either the total hire fee or 5% of their overall profits, whichever was higher. Generally, it was the hire fee that was higher at the end of the day, but just this past summer, we did start to inch into the profit being higher. So that's a really good sort of development of the project. It also meant it was relatively low risk for the museum, as we were guaranteed a minimum amount of money. The space was being well used, and we were supporting a really good project and benefiting the next generation. The virtual school and Herts County Council run the recruitment of the young people and supervise them whilst on site with the museum. We provided health and safety training and introduction to the museum, so they were aware of the situation they were working in and could also promote the museum to visitors just using the cafe and vice versa. and training on our till systems and other relevant processes. So, as I say, quite good for the museum in that quite a self-sufficient project that wasn't too resource intensive. The virtual school initially would do all the ordering of food and things like that. Lately, as we aligned menus last year, we shared that responsibility. Each year we really see the young people grow over the project, which is wonderful. And on the screen, you can see an alumni of the Mill Green Tea Rooms, Jodie Jackman, who was invited back to an event in our grounds meeting the High Sheriff to talk about her experience and the impact that this project had for her. Many of the young people take on extra responsibilities throughout the project, and they have some great ideas, both for developing the menu, developing the visitor flow, and things like that. Because they're working for this intensive period over the summer, they can really take it on board and make suggestions, which then actually we try and incorporate within our normal operational running. So it really is beneficial for the museum. We're also regularly visited by alumni who say how beneficial the experience was to them, many of whom are now working in the food and retail industry. So it really gave them that head start in life. It gave them the skills and the confidence to get a job in the sector. And you can just see some quotes from the participants here. So after working at tea rooms, I managed to get myself a job at McDonald's straight away. I would not be working now if it had not been for the tea room experience. Amazing and wonderful people from similar and different backgrounds, both in terms of customers and co-workers. You gain amazing friends. It was fun and I made more mates while getting paid, which is also a plus. And it grows your confidence and can grow you as a person. And that's it really. I've just put up a couple of links on the screen, which I'm happy to share in the chat as well, which is a link to the virtual school website. As I say, they run lots of interventions and lots of projects, and they are looking to work with more museums and cultural organisations. My contact for this particular project is a guy called Tanya, and he's been happy for me to share his email address with you. And then mine, confusingly, I'm not at the Mill anymore. I'm now curator at the Dickens Museum. So I've included my current email address, but I am more than happy if anyone's got any questions, or I can always put you in contact with the current people at the Mill. That was a whistle-stop tour for you.
Thank you, Emma. That's really good, and double thanks for coming back. I know you've moved on from Mill Hill Museum in Green. So it's really insightful presentation. So Emma's left her contact details. So if you do have any follow-up questions, please make a note of that. So we're moving over to the southeast. We have Ed Fagan, who is the director of the Royal Life Museum Farnham, which is down on the Surrey-Hampshire border. And Ed's going to talk a little bit about how they took on their not franchise, but their cafe was being run by a third party, and that was brought in house, and all the fun they had in suddenly having to directly run their own cafe, which is obviously really important for the well-being of the museum. So over to you, Ed.
Morning, everybody. Okay, so we've now run our own cafe for 15 months. So a little bit of background then. So the Old Kill Museum, as it was, opened in 1973. It is in quite a rural location. There's not very much around us. Our sort of nearest competitor for visitors, I suppose, is the Squires Garden Centre, about a mile down the road. They also have a cafe. The cafe, we'll come back in a minute. The cafe that's on site was in the late 1980s. It is based in a former temporary classroom, which is a timber building that was moved to the museum. So the shop is based in one end of this building, the cafe in the middle, and the kitchen at the other end. It is not particularly fit for purpose, but it's what we've got, and we've made the best of it for quite a while now. So initially, when the cafe was opened, it was run by volunteers. This very simple offer. The cafe was only open for a few hours in the day when the museum was open. It's been run by several tenants in that time. And when I joined the museum, the tenant in the cafe had been in for 9 years. The cafe has seats 25 covers indoors and 50 covers outside in the cafe garden. The cafe garden is really quite nice. It overlooks the museum. The cafe is technically outside the pay line, so you can visit the cafe with visiting the museum. However, usefully or not, depending on how you look at it, visitors to the cafe only still have to pass through the museum shop, so we can count them, which is quite useful. The cafe tenant that was working on site when I arrived 2 and a bit years ago now, as I said, had been in there for 9 years, and she had decided that at the end of 2021 that would be it. She would finish. So I sat with the board of trustees and I gave them a variety of options. You know, putting the cafe out to franchise, looking for another tenant, or running the cafe ourselves. I have to say, running the cafe ourselves was not my favourite option. That was the high risk option, and surprisingly and possibly weirdly, that's what the board of trustees went for. That's what they wanted to do. So that's okay. So we went for it. In the 9 years previous to that, the tenant that was in the cafe rarely paid rent. The arrangement that they had with the museum trust was that they would only pay rent if they made over a certain percentage profit a year. Okay, so for 9 years, the museum has made nothing out of the cafe other than the fact that it was there to provide a service to our visitors. The offer in this cafe with the tenant was very simple. It was a little bit greasy spoon come sort of transport cafe, and the reviews online for it from our visitors were generally not good, I have to say. So there was quite a lot of work to do there in terms of what we could build out of it. I think it's important to touch on the idea of a successful cafe. So one of the conversations I had with the board of trustees when they asked me to take the cafe in-house was, what did they define as success? So we decided that success was not making a profit. If we made a profit, that's great. That's a positive byproduct. But that initially we wanted to provide a good service to our visitors. We wanted to keep them on site. We wanted to encourage secondary spend, increase the dwell time, and get nice reviews, happy customers, and so forth. And that we would like to break even. That was the aim. Okay. So we initially used a catering consultant based locally in Guildford to assist with the initial setup of the cafe, look at what we had, and to help us recruit a catering manager. The initial setup, including, hold on, the phone's ringing. The initial setup, including buying existing equipment off the previous tenant, cost the Museum Trust about £26,000. So that was buying the equipment in, that was recruiting the catering manager, and buying other equipment. So it's funny the things you don't notice. When we got into the kitchen after the tenant had left, we discovered that actually none of the crockery matched, for example. So all the mugs and cups and things were all different sizes. So we actually set about investing a bit and making sure that our presentation was good, that stuff matched, that, you know, the cups we were putting the coffee out in were all the same size, and so forth. So having invested that and got the cafe manager in, we were lucky that we actually had a previous set of accounts from the previous tenant. So we could actually see what the cafe had done in its past. So in the 9 years that it was operated by a tenant, it only met the £85,000 threshold for paying VAT once, and that was in 2019. Okay, so in 2019, the tenant in the cafe had a turnover of just over 100,000, and that was with about 17,000 visitors coming into the museum. So we weren't expecting to need a limited company particularly in the first year. We weren't expecting really what happened next. So our cafe met the £85,000 VAT threshold at the end of month 5. We were in the process of transferring from the old trust formed by deed into a CIO. So there was no mechanism at that point in time for the old trust to own a limited company. So a limited company was set up very quickly using a pair of trustees as the directors, and a special board meeting was held to make that happen. We have since transferred to CIO, and the limited company is now owned by the CIO. As I touched on before, the museum is in a rural area. Okay, so there's not really a public transport link. The nearest bus is about a 20-minute walk away. Squires Garden Centre is about a mile down the road. They also have a cafe, although quite a different clientele, and it is smaller than ours in terms of the number of covers. Squires have been quite supportive with the setup of our cafe, with advice, guidance, encouragement, milk when we've run out, bread when we've run out because we've got it wrong, and so on and so forth. They've been really great. So in 2022-2023, our first full operating year, the museum received 45,000 visitors. 2,000 were cafe only. The cafe turned over 263,000, and the accounts are just being finalised now. It looks like we've made a £32,000 in-year trading loss. Okay, so weirdly, the board of trustees are okay with this. So the trading loss is an important thing. The trading loss is in the main due to our inability and inexperience with predicting visitor flow and predicting the amount of staffing we would require. Okay, so we regularly overstaffed the cafe. Okay, or we predicted that the footfall would be higher than it actually was. Okay, I think it's also important to note that the amount of footfall information that we had when I took over in 2021 was a bit sketchy. So it wasn't quite as detailed as we would like it to be, and of course we didn't have very much information on flow through the cafe and daily sales and so forth. So a lot of stuff sort of had to be made up as we went along. There of course were a number of disasters within that. There was equipment failures, there were extractor fan failures, water heater failures, all sorts of stuff. If it could go wrong in the first year, it went wrong. Okay, it was quite a journey. The staffing has been an interesting thing. We employ the catering manager, we employ a cook, and we employ a barista. They are full-time staff, 3 full-timers now, and the rest of the cafe staff are 0 hours seasonal staff. We have found it extremely difficult to get and maintain 0 hour staff. Part of that is because a lot of them tend to be young people, and getting here without a car is very difficult. But there seems to be generally across the catering industry quite a difficulty with finding people. We got a lot better at running the cafe over our first year. Staffing improved, our profit margins each day improved. I would say that the most important thing really was our monthly checks and balances in terms of what we were doing for income and expenditure. So now we're at a position where with the budget set for 23-24, and with the knowledge we now have, we're now budgeted to generate a £30,000 surplus, provided everything goes the way we want it to, by the end of this financial year. We've also made a number of other changes. So the catering manager is now the commercial manager. She looks after all private hire and the cafe and the shop. We've relaunched our private hire business, so we're doing catering on site for that. And we've now taken on quite a lot of film work. So that again is all boosting what we do. So the benefit of the cafe is much broader than the cafe itself for us. It has been, and the board would agree, you know, a success. We'd quite like it to break even and or make a profit now. That's the next aim. It provides an excellent service for our visitors. We get excellent feedback. We've got lovely reviews. We're continually developing and redeveloping our menus, and it is playing a key part in the increasing footfall for the museum.
Okay, over to Steve Green, who is co-director of Gilbert White's Museum and Gardens, which is a museum in the South Downs National Park in East Hampshire. They had a significant lottery investment a few years ago, which included revamping the cafe, but hot off the press in the last 12 months, they've expanded their offer to include the tap room, which is literally across the road from the museum. So I'll hand over to Steve, who has some slides.
So this presentation is called Developing the Tap Room and Growing the Offer, or as I like to call it, opening a pub when everyone else is closing one. Are you mad? Which is what a number of people asked us when we set about that. So just for a little bit of context first, Gilbert White's House and Gardens is owned by an independent trust. It has a museum dedicated to Gilbert White, the first ecologist, and two members of the Oates family, most notably Lawrence Oates, who was with Scott in Antarctica and went outside for some time, you might remember. We're a fairly complicated organisation and carry out a lot of activities, mostly to try to survive financially. So we have 30 acres of grounds, partly 18th century gardens, partly land managed for nature conservation. We have a 50 cover indoor, 50 plus cover outdoor cafe, which was developed in a lottery project, which Stephen mentioned too. That was actually 2016 to 18, that project. We have a field study centre, which has 5,000 school children through it a year, but doubles as a weddings venue, meetings, functions venue. We've got a holiday flat. And also as part of the lottery project, we opened a brewery, or reopened one, in Gilbert White's original brew house, which was built in 1765. This was partly the result, or it was entirely the result, of volunteers from the local village approaching us saying, we'd like to get the brewery going again. So we got our act together, found some funding, eventually made it happen. It took us about 4 years to sort that out, but eventually here we are. So our strategy as an organisation is very much focused on financial sustainability. So whilst we, we're very conscious of our charitable objects, and that's why we're here, we get no external support. So we've got to generate quite a lot of money to keep the place running. And as an indication of how that is panning out, 8 years ago we were turning over 300,000. This year our budget is just short of $1 million, and we've done that by developing a range of income streams. Some of them are existing businesses, which is obviously our museum, our events program, our cafe and shop, museum shop, but we've also developed a number of new businesses, the brewery being one of them. We've got an apiary beekeeping operation, we've got a holiday flat, and we're developing the brewery side of things. In two years ago, well, about 4 years ago, the pub opposite the museum, the Queen's Hotel, which you can see at the top right there, closed down. It was bought by a developer who wanted to turn it into holiday flats, turn it into residential. That caused a massive planning battle. The village was completely split. Lots of people fell out. It was all really horrible. To cut a long story short, after several planning appeals, the developer was given an opportunity to develop it with one dwelling, some holiday apartments, 6 in total, and then some kind of community use. And he didn't really know what to do. So another local resident brokered a meeting between us and the developer, at which point the developer offered us the ground floor for 99 years rent-free, on the basis that we'd support his development. And that has now started to push the thing through the planning process. So we looked at the space that we had available and the existing permissions, what we could do. And to cut a long story short, we're doing 2 or 3 things. We're developing part of it as a new collections store and as an adult learning centre. But the old bar area, or half of the old bar area, we thought we could actually probably increase our profitability here. So there's an existing pub in the village. There used to be 2, obviously. The existing pub is fine. It's got its own clientele. It's fairly set in its ways. So we didn't want to do anything which was going to compete with them and put them out of business, which would do us no good from a community point of view. And we obviously had to be very different. So we looked at the space that we had available. As you can see from the top left there, it's quite small. So we can fit about 36 people in here, and then it starts to get a bit uncomfortable. So we realized that actually we can make a lot more money selling our beer on draft, and I'll come to that in a minute, than we can selling it through bottles and through kegs to pubs, where the profitability was actually quite low. So we've developed this tap room, we've created a bar. This room was built entirely by volunteers, so it was given to us as a white room with electrics by the developer. There is an existing cellar underneath, which you can see. We got a National Park Sustainable Communities grant to replace the beer lines. The seating is particularly designed to make maximum use of the space. If we had full-size tables in there, we'd only be able to fit about 20 people in. So we bought a load of pews from a chapel which was being demolished in Uttoxeter of all places. So for about 400 quid, we sent a couple of volunteers up there to bring them down. One of the volunteers is a woodworker. He's converted them so the seats are put around the side, the actual pews, and then he's turned the pews that we didn't need into tables, which are quite narrow, but they're big enough for putting beer on, and sharing platters, which is the food offer that we're doing. So the whole thing was designed in-house, and we think it's got quite a good character. It's also got a really good atmosphere. Even when there are only about 6 or 7 people in, it actually feels quite busy. So that's quite a plus point. We opened the tap room in January. We had 3 or 4 soft openings in December last year. So we had staff in, then we had some villagers in. Then we opened officially the first week in January. This is the Lord Lieutenant of Hampshire pulling the first pint. He used to be a brewer himself, so that was all quite appropriate. Then we started opening just 3 nights a week. So Thursday, Friday and Saturday from 6 o'clock until 8:30 with a half an hour drinking up. And we thought it was best to try and box the clientele into a short period of time to try and balance the costs against the income. We've employed a full-time brewer / taproom manager. So his time is split between these 2 things. And we're staffing the taproom with the combination of the manager and volunteers. So the brewery is run by 6 volunteers, and the brewers plus my wife and I, who are the co-directors, volunteer to come in and help out when it's busy. And by doing that, we've gained quite a good understanding of the sort of flows of people through the day. We've just increased the opening hours, so we're now opening from lunchtime on a Saturday, and we've got an extra half an hour opening in the evenings as well, and that's started to increase the income. So this was a brewery income. So we opened the brewery in 2020, and you can see that's got up to about 20,000 turnover. And because we're using volunteers, it's making a reasonably healthy profit margin. That's selling mostly through bottles and kegs, which we sell through our shop and to other pubs. But we also sell special brews to our wedding guests as well. And that's quite a popular thing. Our thinking behind this is a cask's got about 72 pints on it. If we sell it to a pub, they'll pay about 80-90 quid for it. We make about £25 profit per cask that we sell, which is fairly modest. If we sell it in bottles, we can sell a cask's worth for about 165, 170 quid, and we're making about £70 profit. But if we sell it on draft, we can sell the cask for about £324-25, and we're making £270 profit. So that's the thinking behind this. And our thinking is that we can produce about 15,000 pints a year in our brewery. It's quite a small capacity, so we can serve. We think we're going to sell about 10,000 pints in the tap room, and then that leaves us 5,000 for selling in bottles and selling to weddings. Once we've exceeded that, we've then got a bit of a problem, and we're going to have to think again. But we are starting to bring in guest beers when we can't brew fast enough to satisfy demand. So income for the first 3 months, drinks income 10,000, food income about 1.5. We just do sharing platters and nibbles, so olives and pistachios and things like that. Total income 11,500. Cost of sales has been 2,200 because the brewery's selling wholesale to the tap room. Plus there's a little bit of food cost in there, and then we're selling wines and spirits as well, and we've deliberately gone for a really good quality wine and spirits offer because the pub is not so good. So then we got salaries in there, 8,000, total cost 10,800. So the first 3 months we were fairly pleased to find that we'd made a £700 gross profit. Our running costs in terms of overhead are quite limited because we got an attractive deal with the owner of the site on paying for electricity and water and such like. April, the turnover's gone up quite a bit, so the light nights have made a really big difference. We've put some tables outside to increase the capacity, and we've had some the opening hours are obviously making an impact, but we've also had a number of bookings from private hires. So we've had some birthday parties, we've had a Rotary group came to do a beer tasting as well. So we gave them 6 of our own brewed beers to taste. And then they spent the evening in there, and we gave them food. So they paid a per head amount, an amount to have the tasting, and then bought beers as well after they'd had it. So we're pretty pleased with how that's gone, really. Where we go next, the really big challenge is going to be in balancing growing the profitability. So we could quite easily increase the opening times so that we're a full pub. Our license lets us open from lunchtime until 11 o'clock, but the real challenge is if we actually open for an extra 2 nights, how much extra income are we going to get? And we're going to have to work on that. The only way to do it is to try it. So we're doing that, but with a volunteer effort. And at some point, we're going to have to start employing a casual to cover the full-time bar managers at time when obviously you can't work 7 nights a week. So there we go. So basically, that's where we are. Taproom born out of a volunteer brewery and an opportunity that came our way from a developer and a way to sell our beer more profitably.
Thank you, Steve.
To answer any questions.
Yeah, no, and it's really, thanks for the financials as well. I think it's really helpful to sort of see that as well. I know some people are a little bit reticent, so that's really helpful. And it's an area we've seen a few organisations try something new where they do already have a catering offer, and they've just signed to, well, we think there's a gap in the market and seized the opportunity like you have. So that's really helpful. So I'll hand over to Sarah, and I will mute myself.
Okay, hi there. I'm Sarah Michael. I'm the manager at the Farmland Museum, which is in the grounds of Denny Abbey, a 12th century former abbey that we manage on behalf of English Heritage. We are a rural museum with lots of indoor and outdoor space, and we tell the story of farming and life in the Cambridgeshire Fens. And we are a seasonal museum, open March to October. We're only open Thursday to Sunday. And we have a cafe that is in a box appealing of space. The next slide is, yeah, the exterior view. That's it. That's our grain store. So it's a box room with a domestic kitchen. Historically, it was not a very attractive space, really, serving basic fare. I don't know if you can see the next slide, Stephen, the before redevelopment, please. It's thank you. I don't know if you can quite see on next. Mine's not coming full screen. I don't know about everybody else's.
See if I can make that full screen.
I can see the slide and the next one.
There we go.
I don't mind sharing my screen if that's easier.
Let's see if I can.
It was basically. Don't worry, I can talk about it.
Okay,
it was a simple space
sorry about that.
Serving really basic fare, I think. That's all right. So ham or cheese roll, pre-packed cakes, filter coffee, run by a team who had no catering experience, really. They'd started off as volunteers, serving tea from a polystyrene cup, sort of in the early 2000s, and they'd progressed to turning it into a cafe that actually sold things. It wasn't so team, and I spent the first years reviewing the cafe and working out what worked, what didn't, whether it was actually somewhere that people wanted to come. And I observed that most visitors brought a picnic when they came in 2019. At the end of that year, the cafe made a loss, unsurprisingly, and I'm not sure it had been managed to not make a loss for a very long time. Trustees and I took a decision that in 2020 we would make some changes, but prior to opening in 2020, we were obviously closed immediately because of COVID. But that was an opportunity for us, actually, because it gave us that season to actually think about what we wanted to do with the cafe. And we came to the conclusion that what we needed was a person, somebody with real catering experience and hospitality experience to help us turn it around. So at the start of 2021, we decided to take a chance and employ a cafe manager who is employed on an annualized hours contract. So she works pretty much full time over the open months, and then same way that I do and our curator does, we all work a fewer hours in the winter. We took on Laura. We were very lucky. She wasn't, we were. She'd just been made redundant as a cafe manager for National Trust, so she had wonderful experience to bring with her. She joined us at the start of 2021, and the first thing we did was convert the cafe into a much nicer space, which you can just about see on the sort of after redevelopment slide. We didn't have a lot of money to make these changes. We decided to invest the money actually in the person, in Laura, to help us to turn it around. So we called in favours, we approached local kitchen companies, electrical companies, we managed to get the fittings for the space for free. We got a chest freezer, a chiller, explaining what we were doing to people, and there's a lot of kind of corporate social responsibility people within teams who'll go, yeah, have our X display kitchen, or have this, have that. So we managed to fit it out at very low cost. We did buy a jacket potato oven from a friend for a reasonably low cost. We bought a panini grill from eBay, and we invested in hiring a coffee machine. So we pay monthly rental for that. And our volunteers painted the space, fitted the serving area, did everything to get it up and running. The menu was devised to be very simple but appealing. And what I was actually going to do, Stephen, was I was going to go 2 slides ahead because I rejigged the way I was going to talk about it last night. So if you could go ahead to the end. Yeah, we serve all homemade cakes. We serve simple lunches. We do paninis, sandwiches and potatoes, all with a range of fillings. And then we have a selection of hot and cold drinks. So it's absolutely nothing too complicated, but it seems to work. And in 2021, the first year of operation in this form of working, it made a profit. It made a small profit, but it did make a profit. And we were absolutely delighted. But more than making a profit, it has transformed our museum. So it's transformed the atmosphere, it's transformed the visitor numbers, it's transformed the kind of dwell time of visitors. So they are coming and they are staying and they are returning. The cafe is within the museum site itself, so admission charges do apply. But as a rural museum, we have a captive audience once they are in. But we have a ticketing structure that means that people can, locals in particular, can come back and do come back for free. So we have an annual ticket whereby people come once, they get a ticket for 12 months. And we also have the advantage of being on a site that's shared with English Heritage, in that English Heritage members get free admission. So we got more from it than the small profit in the first year. We got a very, very different feel to our museum from having a nicer offer. 2022, it grew and grew and became somewhere that was frequented by not just our visitors, but we had regulars who started coming back. People were coming not just for the museum, they were coming to meet friends. We've got a business park down the road. We started to see people turning up just to come for lunch from the business park. And it really has taken off in a way that we didn't, it's been better than we hoped. But how has it worked is the question. And we would all agree here that it's worked because of the people and the way we run it with the people we have. So if you could go back to the previous slide, please, Stephen. That on the person on the right in that picture is Laura. She is our cafe manager, and she is the only paid member of staff dedicated to the cafe. She works 5 days a week. She works on a Wednesday to do her baking and setup, and then she works Thursday to Sunday when we're open. And she is supported by volunteers like Nikki on the left, and the volunteers come in and help. We have some regular volunteers who will come in, and then when we have event days, we have lots of volunteers who will help. If we had to pay the number of people who volunteer, it would not make a profit. We think we could make it break even, but then it wouldn't be doing what we need it to do, which is to generate income for our museum that's just lost all its local authority funding. So we actually do need to generate income for the cafe. So we need to keep staffing it with volunteers. Our volunteers are fantastic, but they pick and choose what they do. They will not all make coffee. They will not all serve customers. They will not all make lunches. I mean, they're all fully food hygiene trained, and obviously everyone in there could make lunches, but a lot of them won't. So last year we tried to recruit a second member of staff to basically be trained up to Laura's level and to do everything she does so she could cover her holiday. We found that the hours we could then give her once she was fully trained weren't enough for somebody who is trained to run a cafe. So what we did instead was we trained me, and we trained, we have a volunteer who's a retired corporate catering, she had a corporate catering business. So she and I are trained, and we cover Laura's holiday, which is in fact what I am doing today because she's off for the week. So I will need to shoot up from here soon because I have a volunteer covering it at the moment. And that's why it works, because we've got a group of people who will all pitch in, and it works because we haven't had to train up a second manager or an assistant manager. And it also works because we have big event days on our site. So we need at least an event day a month to really make a profit, because it does now fully cover its costs on every day that it's open, which is a step up from 2021 when some days it didn't, as people were getting to know it. But on a big event day, we can make sort of a month's income in one day, but we need 5 or 6 really good volunteers on board on those days to make it work. So that's our cafe, that's the Docubox Cafe. And in conclusion, I would say that it works because we kept it simple. We've got a great team of volunteers to support the manager, and we have just fantastic people in there who are willing to pitch in and do a bit of absolutely everything. And it's become a very nice place to be. And I think that was 10 minutes.
Well done, well done. Yeah, you've kept the time brilliantly. So no, thank you for that. And sorry for the slight glitch in the presentation. Hopefully people got enough to see the images of the cafe.
That's all right.
Looks absolutely wonderful. Okay, well that's been a real great mix of examples of cafes, and hopefully you found that really useful. I'm now going to pass over to Paul Cottrell, who'll be leading the rest of the training, and just going into some of those things which hopefully the case studies touched upon, about how you might want to apply some of these things to your cafe, whether you're about to set one up or already have one but need to look at redevelopment, or your change of circumstances, or you might want to extend into different things. So everything from understanding what you've got at the moment to staffing and cost control. But I will be quiet because the reason you came here isn't for me, it's for Paul. So Paul Cottrell, over to you. I had set up the breakout rooms, just to let you know.
Hello all, can you all hear me okay? Yeah, super. If you could just pop my presentation up then, please, Stephen, that would be marvelous.
No problems, hold on.
My name's Paul Cottrell. I'm a catering consultant working with a company of other consultants called Turpin Smale, who operate throughout the UK. I've been consulting now for just over a year with Turpin Smale, and before that had a career within British Estates. If you go to the next slide, Steve, I can show you where it is that I've worked. Share next slide. Is that all right? So yeah, 30-year career really that's been within the heritage sector. So I've worked at Chatsworth House, Castle Howard and Waddesdon Manor, which I know is not far from some of the people that are sharing today. And you might feel actually what the relevance is with some of the businesses that you're involved in, because of the sort of size and scale of these places that I've worked in, dealing with huge visitor numbers. But I just want to sort of share that actually, from my experiences, not only have these kind of covered within hospitality, you know, full service restaurants and fine dining and so on and so forth. It has given me the sort of fortunate opportunity to manage and operate sort of isolated pods of things across estates. So whether that be hatch service, cabin service, assisted service, outside catering, being creative with pop-ups and tents and so on and so forth in fields, it's really given me a sort of broad brush approach to how we manage people on the estates that I've worked in. So the other kind of sort of advantage that I've got really with my career is that I started as a chef, which has given me a real insight really how front and back can work and the marriage between the two. And it's also given me a huge opportunity to really understand flow, behaviors of people, you know, customers' expectations, and what works through a lot of trial and error, to be honest. I'll hold my hand up, I haven't got everything right. But what that has given me is a real insight into things that, you know, when it hasn't gone quite right, what you can change to make it a little bit better. So all of these shared experiences are real, really. You know, I've gone through them within 30 years, and sort of what I've learned throughout of it is kind of sort of having a responsibility of just getting on with it, and then having these wonderful organisations behind me that's backed that. So could you go to the next slide, please, Steve? So what we're going to talk about today really is that sort of symbiotic relationship between the museum and cafe, and in those case studies, especially, you know, some of them have really understood how making your cafe sing, how well it can sort of sing for the rest of the operation, the museum that they're coming to visit. And these things that we're going to talk about just on the right there, this sort of kicks off really with a little session, a breakout session, to understanding the need to agree your rationale for the catering offer that you've got there in your museums. And I would say really to kick off the bat, and I know it was mentioned, I think in Ed's little piece, it's not all about, for me, making a bottom line profit. I think you really do have to understand your objectives and ensure that they are realistic, because sometimes these things can be led by a little bit of vanity and actual being unrealistic to what actually you're possibly faced with it within your businesses. And some of that can be kicked off really on the next slide, if you don't mind, Stephen. So what we're going to do is just have a little breakout for 10 minutes because I think we all really just need to understand what it is that you want out of this session. You possibly not all of you running cafes at the moment, you might all be, they might have all their own little sort of idiosyncrasies behind why they're not quite giving you what possibly it is that you need from them. And just there's a sort of some triggers to kind of give you an idea of actually a lot of these things sometimes can lead you to a model that actually gives you what it is that you want at the end of it to make you, you know, reach your objectives. So, you know, increasing dwell time might be something that you want to achieve. You might want something that's destination led to lead to that dwell time to become bigger. I know Sarah mentioned that earlier. You know, if you start really getting a name for yourself, it can bring in that secondary spend because people just want to visit the cafe as well as. Sometimes you will have, and this did come out in the case studies as well, challenging spaces to manage with that sometimes does lead to a certain model. It would be great that we could all think of, you know, table service, you know, high end, but actually the reality might not be that because of the space that you've got. Increasing that footfall again and driving more profit might be the, you know, the key aim that you want to get from it. So sometimes, you know, you might be running a cafe at the moment that's just losing money because of the way it's set up, and we can talk about that, you know, later on in the day about how, you know, things you can do to change that. A lot of your businesses, I'm pretty sure, some of the case studies alluded to it earlier, it's, you know, working through those peaks and troughs of trade, and sometimes that, you know, is driven by that unpredictability nature of the weather. You know, some days you could have bank holiday Monday, 3 days that no day will be the same through the weather, which means no day's the same with your turnover. And that's, you know, one of the most challenging things to navigate your way through. And I think one of the case studies alluded to that. You know, sometimes you can over-egg the pudding with your resource because you think something might happen that the reality is very different, which means that, you know, you're overstaffing, and you have to have, you know, possibly difficult conversations with staff to say, you know, we're a bit quiet today, and we don't really need you. Can you clock off early? Which, you know, obviously impacts on potential morale of people, and, you know, those that, you know, need to earn an income could be let down on that day through making that income for themselves because you're sending them home. You might have queues as well, you know, the classic queue that could potentially, you know, not be a queue by just simple ways of redefining your servery outlet or something like that. So we can talk about a bit more about that later. Community-led, the wonderful initiative at the start, that Green Mill case study was just such a wonderful initiative that it might not all be about driving profit. It might be something more than that, something more wholesome. And then we could also, you know, within the rationale, look at reducing labour costs potentially. That might be the thing that's really killing you, and it's gaining an understanding of why that's happening and what it is that you can do to potentially make that work a little bit better. And the industry now is becoming very clever with how it uses tech to take people out of the chain of what we call sequences of service. Yeah, I just wanted to go back to this slide, and just on that right side, the points that we're going to cover next, really. So, you know, we talk now about, you know, understanding the need to agree the rationale for your catering offer and not having it just sort of solely led by one agenda, maybe that big profit, and having that as a sort of, you know, the realism of what you're faced with really is the best starter. And then underneath there, gain an understanding of people management within the catering setting and some of the things that you can do really to help your people and get them, you know, gaining confidence in their own role for the future. And the importance of setting measurable objectives for the teams. We'll talk about what that looks like, and then, you know, the classic now of having to face such a sort of monumental sort of task of trying to get those costs under control, and the things that you can put into place to hopefully give you a better chance of managing those going forward. And then a little case study that I want to just put to you. You know, I'm pretty sure a lot of you are faced with challenges. This is a challenge that I was faced with recently that I can talk about, and the things that we did to fix it. That I'm hoping, you know, elements of that will resonate, and some of the theory can be put to your operations as well. So, is your cafe fit for purpose? Is a little case study of my own. So we'll hopefully finish by 12:30. There's quite a lot to get on to, and there is going to be another little breakout session, but not for long, just 5 minutes on controlling costs. So if you could slip to slide 5, please, Stephen. So the catering context and how to manage the people, just on that top left box, I think Sarah alluded to actually, once you find a good person, and it was nice to hear actually that she managed to find somebody that was ex-NT who was already a catering manager. So she's been really lucky in that, I would say, because they are really the absolute key to the success of those businesses. And what you've got to kind of look at without those senior roles within the cafes, whether that be a cafe supervisor or cafe manager or cafe cook, supervisor, whatever that most accountable person is in that business, you need to ensure that they do have a good level or an understanding of leadership and some competencies in the role that can just help you help them manage their people, because they are going to be dealing with small teams and they're going to be dealing with people. And sometimes there is a tendency, especially within our industry, to think that it's kind of just a bit arms and legs and that you just need bodies and then people will work it out without any sort of additional help. And many times I've come across people that are being sort of promoted from within because they seem to be good people and they're good workers, or they're grafters or whatever you call them. And there's an assumption there that they can just manage people and how, you know, those difficult situations sometimes that they can be faced with when managing people. So I would say that top left one, you know, once you've found somebody that you can do the competencies, that is good at the job, is good with customers, has a base level knowledge of hospitality, and they've worked in the industry, see if they do need a little bit of help along the line of making sure that they have been trained in people skills to, you know, to manage difficult situations, to have adult conversations with people that are appropriate. And then also with that, I do often come across businesses that haven't really defined what those roles are in terms of a role profile or even a job description. So they're happily, merrily working away, but sometimes just making it up because they don't absolutely know what it is that they need to be concentrating on. So I do quite a bit of work by just going back to the start and saying, look, let's have a look at your team. What are they all doing? What do they think they're employed in the business as? Well, why don't we redefine that? And then, you know, that really does help once that person's got those defined role and responsibilities. They can kind of hook into that, and then you can manage that accordingly going forward. You can use that job description as an aid to where they possibly need a bit of help, or they're falling short, or they're excelling in. So that's the top left. Just underneath there, again, they are absolutely key to the success, not only for the sort of experience of the customer, but also of the team. If that bit's wrong, and you've got a bit, I don't know, you may have somebody who's a little bit grumpy or can't manage their own life and they're late, or, you know, so on and so forth, that all just has a huge knock-on effect to the rest of the team. So they are absolute key to the success. And once you've got that person who's dedicated, who's bright, who can do the job competently, hold on to them and look after them, because they are very, very difficult to find. I would say the cafes need accountability from a senior role anyway, but also to backfill that. And Sarah did mention that earlier in her business. She hasn't really got enough in the pot just yet to pay for a number two to be underneath that, so they're backfilling it with themselves. But if you can afford it, I would always say that if you have somebody more senior and then somebody underneath that as a dynamic duo, you will be able to hit consistency levels much more easier. Because sometimes there's a tendency to just run businesses with one person who's accountable, and then hey ho, they go on holiday, or they're off ill, or whatever, and then suddenly consistency levels drop because they haven't got that person underneath them to hold the baton while they're not there. Again, I'm not saying that any of this is easy, because you might not have the business there to stand that because of what you're turning over. But it could be that you could be creative with that, like with what Sarah has, to backfill it with competence. And you might find that there's somebody who just wants to do a part-time role, but is actually skilled in the level that you need as an assistant, that can just do it on odd days when they're not there. But to not have somebody on any particular day who's accountable, who can manage customers, full stop, then you're opening yourselves up for a bit of trouble. On the top right there, it's to train the staff. I mean, it is all about making sure that those that are working in those cafes understand the menus like those that have written them, or the managers or the seniors. There's very, very often, I'm sure you will have been out and about, you've gone to places, and unfortunately you find yourself in front of somebody who doesn't know all of the answers. And there's a tendency to feel that, you know, they should, and it can sometimes lead to kind of uncomfortable or embarrassing conversations that actually, when I'm faced with that, I don't look at that person and think, crikey, you're just a bit daft. I always think, crikey, these people haven't trained this person, and that's unfair. So you have got to ensure, and it's all about sitting down with people and going through stuff and making them feel confident about them knowing all of the answers. So they have a wider understanding and being able to answer questions about alternative milks or whatever that may be on dietary requirements. So they feel comfortable that they can have those conversations without doing that classic, oh, I'm sorry, I'm going to have to go and speak to my supervisor, which is just not a good look. And then also having the people who are working there understanding the wider setting. And why I've put that is that, again, the industry can sometimes fall into a trap of it just being a little bit arms and legs, and let's pop people in there because they're good workers. And on first day, they don't genuinely, or they might not know their wider setting, but visitors just ask questions, and they could ask a base level question like, where's the loo, or where's the entrance, and how do I pay for my ticket, or I've got an event on today, where do I go, whatever. If that person doesn't know that base level information, that again can come across awkwardly and just have a sort of negative effect on the experience for those that are visiting. So I would always say, you know, if you can, try and build a little induction pack for your team on first day, not so they know the whole history about where they're visiting, but just base level stuff that they can give them a good idea and understanding on day one. They're going to be able to answer a few questions. Give time to that, please do. And, you know, I create documents for clients that allows that person on day one to understand not just about the coffee, the menu, the tea, but also about the visitor, sorry, the actual attraction that they're working in. That also helps break down silo thinking from visitor experiences, because it all feels then like one team. You've not got a cafe within a museum, you've got it all, and it's all singing and all understanding on the same page. Actual key skills for the job, I always feel that you have to create champions. And your business might be quite small, and that's absolutely fine. But think about those key disciplines that you need to have in those businesses. I put barista, you know, if you've got one person in your business that's the champion for that discipline, then you can go to that person and say, I need some help with X, Y, or Z on that discipline if they know it all. So it's creating champions within the team that can help you on any given day on induction. So the other example of that, you know, would be customer service. You might have somebody within the team that's really, really strong on customer service that could do a bit of shadowing on any given day to give them more confidence when they're hitting the ground running. So give time to that as well. And then just on that bottom right, there are some key things I would say that you can sort of think on actually, that you are at an advantage to some other places out there, especially restaurants and pubs and those hospitality environments, is that especially for managers or supervisors, you can, in rural locations, find yourself in a situation where you're more appealing to a pub because there's not a split shift, or a restaurant because there's not a breakfast service. So just be mindful of that. Actually, you can find good people with that sort of theory behind it when you think, actually, I'm at an advantage. And when recruiting, you celebrate that because, you know, some people might see that as a real pull because the work-life balance in your environment for families could potentially be better for them. And they can potentially, you know, have a way that they could do the school pickup around because they could just do core hours or something like that. So it doesn't necessarily feel like you are fighting against the rest of the industry to find the best people. You sometimes can think that you are at an advantage to other sectors. And on the bottom there, you know, I'm a realist. I completely understand what you're faced with, and invariably you will be, you know, managing casual labour, sometimes quite young casual labour that haven't got the life skills that somebody of, you know, a greater age has. And that's very, very challenging. And I've just put in there, especially in affluent areas, because I've worked in the southeast, and I did feel that actually it was very challenging to find people to work at Waddesdon Manor because of that pull of the M25 and everybody wanting to be a professional and work in London. You know, it was hard to find people that would come and work in the hospitality industry. So we would invariably be dialing down the age, and some seasons be opening on a lot of young people. And with those young people, they need a huge amount of steering and help. So that sort of sets the tone, I hope, for the people management side of things. I don't know if anybody's got any questions specifically on that for now. I don't know if we've covered headlines. Is that okay?
Could I just raise something really quickly? I just sent a quick message. My dilemma with staffing is the fact that there's so much expectation now from a health and hygiene side of it. So safer foods, better business, allergens, all of that. It's really difficult to find the time for staff to be able to concentrate on that properly. So there's a fear that you're not actually keeping on top of the things that are vitally important. But because they get dragged away, there's time set aside for admin, but that invariably those hours get pulled into just running the business, just staffing up. So that's one of my challenges with staff.
Yeah, and I found e-learning, and actually there are some providers out there that aren't. Yeah,
we use Virtual College for the actual learning. It's the actual doing it. It's the sitting down and making sure that all of those, you know, all the allergens are up to date. All of the, you know, we're doing what we said we do. We're using the right colour clock. You know, all of that. That management side, with, you know, we struggle because we've only got limited hours, and when it's a choice between fill out some paperwork or actually open my cafe with a member of staff, I choose the latter.
Well, yeah, but you've got to kind of look at it in a way that you just do have to give the time for this, because if you don't, you can find yourself possibly in sticky situations if you're not careful. You have to protect yourself from that. And that is finding the discipline within. You are going to do this piece of work, and sometimes you might have to build that into, you paid them to do that without them actually serving tea or coffee or whatever on their first day. But you do have to give that time, otherwise, you know, you will only continue to operate in a sort of, not firefighting, but in a way that means that you haven't possibly given the investment that you should have, that could potentially lead you to a situation that's unpalatable if it is an extreme situation. You know, it's very rare that those happen, but you have to give the time to this, or otherwise, you know, that you can open yourself up to it. And so that's what I would say. You just got to kind of go with how important some of this work is prior to them actually getting on the tools, so to speak. But it's not easy, and I fully appreciate that it isn't easy. Sometimes I've said to people, you know, do this work out of hours, and again, you know, you will be paid X, Y, or Z for that. But you know, that's sometimes a way that you can combat it as well. So they're not doing it during work hours as such. You're giving them the time to do it elsewhere. But if you're utilising the tech, that's great, because some of this stuff can feel quite onerous if you go out in sort of 40-minute sessions for some of this stuff each time, and some people feel that they've got to do all of it, like fire health awareness training and all of that. In these environments, for me, you have to ensure that, you know, that food safety is at the forefront of these environments, and if you haven't been respectful to that, then it will only lead to potential complications. Is there any other questions?
There's nothing else in the chat at the moment.
I mean, this is a piece of work, and this is, you know, this needs managing, and this needs thought, and this needs time dedicated to it. But once you start with this, changing this, how you operate, things do get a lot easier, and people potentially start getting much stronger, more confident, and it helps you know, dial down that revolving door sometimes, because people are invested in more and they feel more part of it. Shall we move on to the next slide then, Stephen?
Will do.
So aids of what this could look like, and I did say to Stephen, some of this stuff is quite dry and I didn't want to put it into this presentation, but I can land some of these templates afterwards for Stephen to use, to then you can access and take inspiration from. But constant delivery, you need to kind of feel that every single day is the same, and you've got a consistency that you've got to manage. And again, that's hard because of people and you know, and food going off and not managing spaces properly, and so on and so on and so on. But some of these things I put in place really do help, not only those that are managing the business, but those that are working within them as well, because everybody understands what it is they're meant to be doing, and there's no interpretation. Because very, very often I come across people saying, why can't they serve a cup of tea? It's obvious. And actually, you've got to stand back and think, well, I'm sure they can serve a cup of tea, but they're serving that cup of tea how they think a cup of tea should be served. So interpretation starts ruling, and one person does it one way, another person does it another way, and so on and so on and so on. Because that standard of delivery hasn't been defined. And it can get so base level, and I kid you not, these people that do it really well get very base level. And I've seen businesses out there that do it super well, where it is literally toast on a plate with a butter pat. But they've done it so that toast and butter pat on a plate is exactly what it is everybody should be doing. So, hey, guess what? They don't then serve 5 slices of toast and 16 butter pats on the plate, and it's the right plate, and it's got the right spoon next to it, and so on and so on and so on. So these aids are super, super helpful. So top left there, one-to-one appraisals and check-in time. Give yourselves time to work with your teams to have roundtable discussions about what it is that you need to work through, because you will find lots and lots of practical stuff gets thrown around that table that you can fix very quickly with a discussion. Weekly meetings are absolutely key in terms of revenue and setting objectives in terms of budgets and targets and driving your teams to actually sell more. If you're engaging them in the numbers, it really helps get them on side to start selling more scones or selling more cups of tea or upselling to an afternoon tea or whatever. If they don't know this information, they're not even thinking about it, so they're just getting on with it. And whereas you might have some real commercially driven things that you need to get on with that you're not giving your teams a chance to help you with. And weekly meetings that are structured, you know, I'm not saying you have to have an agenda and somebody type it all up and it all goes back out as such, but something that's really clear that helps them work to the next week, and so on and so on. An objective setting, I break this down into 3, and it can be for your catering managers or your supervisors or your cook. You know, it can be as simple as 3 little things. Please, can that cake table look like this? Can it be, let's look at next week's revenue and we want to hit £1,000 for that day or whatever. Or it could be, we need a new coffee machine. Can you go out and find a new supplier or whatever? Just concentrate on 3 that people can really understand, and then action, and then finish for the next time you meet with them. But set those objectives and drive your teams to what it is that you want them to do. Because sometimes, again, none of those conversations happen. So people are just, again, getting on with what they feel the objectives are. And then define the standards of practice, what we call key performance indicators, are all those things like opening and closing schedules. Because again, if you're running little parts of your businesses, and there's lots of those, sometimes they don't get locked up properly, and their fire alarm can go off, and then somebody gets called in the middle of the night. These things happen if you don't define an opening, running and closing procedure. And then menu specifications. I'm not here saying, you know, you guys should run with really complicated menus, because that would be crazy. Making things super simple is key. Not having complexities within your menu that means you've got, you know, expensive chefs with octopus arms trying to put loads of things on a plate when you don't necessarily need it. And if that menu specification is simple, it does need defining of what that looks like. If that's your standard and that's your portion control and that's what it is, you've got to make sure you've got some visual aids with a recipe underpinning that knowledge. That's usually the best way up in front of people so they can follow it. Now, I'm telling a lot of clients out and about that there's a wonderful kitchen management tool that can give you all of this information very easily in tech form, and I will share that with Stephen so you've got that, and I'll give you it later. But it's something that doesn't cost a lot of money and actually is real-time menu costings without you having to input loads of information into spreadsheets. So I'll share that later with Stephen. But you do have to have a management tool in place to be able to control those portion costs, because, you know, after staff, that is the biggest cost within your business. And then going on to visual aids, merchandising standards. Again, if you don't define what your cake table looks like, every single day it will look different. So just be mindful, if you've got a bottle fridge or a display cabinet, selling chilled stuff or children's boxes or whatever that may be, and you want it to look a certain way, take a picture of that. And sometimes what's great is you can pop it on the back door of that, so it's out of the way of the visitors, they can't see it, which means that your Coke or your, you know, your lovely Luscombe's cordials or whatever in that cabinet are displayed how you want them to be. And then sequences of service. Actually take a step back sometimes and feel what it is that the visitor's having to do within your environment, and work it out and actually see how much your staff's doing versus visitors. Because a sequence of service, what we call touch points, whether that be the touch points from customer to staff member, or touch points within the actual environment itself, work that journey out. And what you can do then is feel that if that journey can be done differently by taking an element of it out, then you're potentially making more sense to your business in terms of customer flow. And if somebody's looking to open up a cafe and they haven't got one at the moment, if you don't respect that sequence of service and hypothetically in your own mind work that out, you can potentially start falling into traps that is heavy with resource. And you could be falling into traps where your staff are becoming very costly and your income's quite low, so you've got a bad recipe for driving that contribution. And sometimes I go into places and just advise them, actually, you've got 40 seats here and you've set a cafe up that means that everything's being delivered to the table as a table service option. And hey, you're making £1,000 at the end of the day, but you've got 6 or 7 people to deliver that £1,000, where you might find you can break elements of that out. And you will see this out and about, I'm sure, when you go to the high street. They're so super slick at it that actually subliminally you've managed a lot of those processes from the visitor. So they are getting their own can of Coke off a multi-deck. they are, you know, going away and getting all of their cutlery and all of that, they are potentially clearing their own table for you as well. That means your costly staff don't have to do that. And what your costly staff can do is concentrate on final delivery and, you know, a great cup of coffee, for instance. Out and about, I don't know if you're seeing this, but I am. Slowly kicked off, you know, from the guys like McDonald's, you know, many years ago. They've been at it for many years, but it's starting to infiltrate its way through into farm shops now. But tills are now becoming so techy that you can choose everything with and pay without having to have that transaction with a person in front of you. So again, that person can just concentrate on making that great cup of coffee or making that great plate of food. So there are things now that you can really think, especially when you're starting from scratch, of how you can set your cafe or your business up to become cost effective and not resource heavy. We talked about induction, so aids for that. They can be, sequences of service can be what I call Bibles for those spaces, and you create those Bibles, and that's got everything in there that's a go-to. So that lady who mentioned about how difficult it is to sometimes take people away from the doing because you just haven't got the time, you can give those people a pack for them to take home that's potentially got all of that information in it for them to digest in their own time. And that can cover some of the very important stuff like allergen information or safer food, better score, so on and so on and so on. If that makes sure that you're covering all of your bases, you potentially maybe then don't have to sit them behind a computer and do any e-learning. But those induction packs are absolutely super tools that people can have, that you can make reference to. They've got all of the information in. That needs updating, you know, when you change menus or you've got a new idea or whatever, they need to be live documents, but are great ways of getting all of that information into a concise area for your guys to run with. And then management and leadership, I did mention that earlier about how important it is to ensure that your supervisors are good leaders and have good people skills. Because they will be key to the success of that, and making sure that all of this is a way of making you sure you can dial down that sort of revolving door of staff, and then ensure that casual labor that you're relying on, because you have to, is has things to help them on their way on day one. Okay, is that all right? Any other questions on aids for constant delivery? That's what I'll say. I'll put some of this stuff in Steve's inbox so you can access this. That will help you kind of really understand what that looks like. But again,
Paul.
Yes.
Hi. So my name's Kelly. I'm from Suffolk Archives, and we are run by Suffolk County Council. And we have a tenant who manages our cafe. So I'm just kind of wondering how we implement quite a lot of what you spoke about on the slide without being micromanaging, because we have a service level agreement, we have a contract. It's up to essentially the tenant to manage the cafe, and we have fortnightly meetings with the cafe supervisor and regular contract reviews, and annual reviews and you know, KPIs and whatnot. But it's just a bit difficult to know kind of like how not to overstep, but also it's definitely in our interest to make sure that, like, you know, they're using their time, you know, to the best ability, that we have reduced queues, that we have, you know, food wastage, green agenda, all this other kind of stuff is being taken into account, given the fact that we don't have shared systems. We don't have live documents that they can update. It's a lot of back and forth and saving as and overriding. And then, you know, I kind of feel a bit weird saying like, well, give me your paperwork, essentially. Can I check over your paperwork for your one-to-ones, and what's your side work like, and all this other kind of stuff. So how would you kind of approach that situation?
Well, I wouldn't approach it with treading on eggshells. I would go in and, you need to ensure that if you're feeling that actually, the controls are being lost, and they're not giving you the standard that you want, you have to hold them to task. And then, if there's a review coming up, it needs to be an honest conversation that, you might need to look at that review, because when outsourcing, I've always worked in-house, so my whole career has been the caterer within that organisation. I've never operated in the businesses that I've worked in an outsourced way. There's no right, it came up in our little session, there's no right answer to outsourcing and insourcing, to be honest, and it's all about relationships and making sure that if you're working with a third party, they are delivering absolutely on what it is that you set those ground rules out to start with, delivering on what it is that you've agreed. And if that's falling short, you have to continually hold them to task. And then when the review comes up, that's a conversation, isn't it? But if they aren't running these systems and they aren't giving you the standards that you want, I would say that needs a full review, doesn't it? Because essentially the visitor comes to your business and doesn't necessarily care or know who's running that cafe. And the extremes of it, where it becomes really challenging for operators when they lose control, is when a third party starts feeling so disjointed from the whole visitor experience, and actually awfulness can start happen where staff are told not to empty the bins because that's not their job, and all of these sorts of things that can become very toxic. Really does question why you've got that person in there, and you need to kind of look for the future. But yeah, hold them to task, and if they're not delivering, you want to see this stuff. I would say if they're not giving you this, then it's obvious. Then they're not managing the business properly.
Yeah, yeah, it's very different to their existing portfolio of outlets, where they've been quite reactive and haven't really had to be very proactive before. Whereas this is a very commercial outlet and it's a very different approach. And I haven't seen a shift in planning or delivery that matches the model that our outlet operates under. And I think that's kind of my main kind of concern, where there's a bit too much reliance on kind of footfall that they feel should be kind of like automatic, and it's definitely not automatic, and it's not shouldn't be counted. So yeah, it's difficult, with councils as well, with all the contracts and all the different relationships. And we don't have sole contract relationship with this particular provider as well. And they do everything from facilities to printing to cafe and whatnot. So it's quite political with a small p.
Yeah, no, I can appreciate that, and it can in certain circumstances get a little bit ugly if you're not careful, and that's why when outsourcing, it's all about making sure that you've had those conversations to start with, and you can trust the delivery, and you're having honest conversations about what's falling short, if it is falling short. Yeah, so that I would say the other extreme sometimes that can creep in with outsourcing is that when it's very obvious that the cost has been stripped out of the actual food that people are having within those environments. So you suddenly, that the operator's trying to control his own costs. He's obviously got a fee on top of that, or their own costs. He's got a fee on top of that back to the owner. And he starts, suddenly your lovely bread is turned into something that's not so lovely, and and then there's two slices of cheap ham instead of one lovely slice of beautifully locally sourced ham, and all of that. So
yeah, and also the fact that we have an agreed profit share at the end of each financial year. But I mean, if they were really good business people, they would make sure that there's technically as little profit as possible, and they would just buy up a bunch of equipment at the end of each year. You know, kind of like people who are self-employed and doing taxes.
Yeah.
So I think there's a lot of kind of like financial or commercial kind of like loopholes that I don't think the council has necessarily anticipated when going into these kind of like agreements and stuff. So it's just really interesting kind of going through a full year of trade in real terms, because I think we've all had this kind of stop-start experience. And so, yeah, it's interesting in that respect. So I'll stop dominating the time. I know we have quite a bit.
That's fine. No, but I think you need to do it. You know, don't feel that you're treading on eggshells with these people. You need to get what it is that you signed up for, and if they're not delivering on that, you have to hold them to task. Absolutely. Thank you. Any other questions at the moment? Shall we move on then, Stephen? So I would say, just wrapping it up, investing in people, really. I know there's chefs here. It's not necessarily your environments, but that's two lovely people there that are managing others. And if you invest in them, it really does settle down the team and drops to the bottom line. If you've got to kind of look at it as the key is to get those cafes settled. And once they're settled with good people, you watch them fly. And I think, Sarah's case study at Denny Farmland was a good way that actually what's really happening in her life is actually the key. Finding good people, helping them along the lines of development, and it really does drop to the bottom line. If you haven't, then controls start just becoming out of control, and it starts affecting the profitability. So nurture the talent, check in time, set those objectives, define a hierarchy, even if it's just two people, so everyone's clear of who's doing what, building confidence, and then letting them become part of the bigger picture. And that can sometimes, building confidence is having some away days. And I often mention to clients, actually, those that are working in your business, they don't necessarily shop in the same shops that you or I do, and they don't understand or know about these places that maybe you or I do, because they haven't lived that yet. You sometimes have to take them out and show them other places and spaces. And I would say, it's not all London centric when you want to go out there and do cafe tours or look at what other people are up to. There's some really great cities in the UK like Bristol and York and Cambridge and Norwich and Manchester and Sheffield, and all of these that have got some really great inspirational independence that you can steal ideas from about how to display cakes, or what a great cup of coffee might look like, or a theming or merchandise or a table, all of that can help really set a lovely personality in your environment. You can get some of those ideas by just going out there and seeing it, but take your team with you when you do, so they can start breathing and living and thinking a bit more like you are. If you're wanting to inspire menus, take them to a lovely cafe that you think actually some of what they're doing, we can take elements of that into our cafe. So please do that, and it will help them again build confidence and make them feel like they're part of something bigger than just their cafe.
Paul, would you like any of the groups to feedback, or I know we're a little bit tight for time, we've only got about 10 15 minutes left, so
yeah, well, I suppose it wasn't that much time, but the classic is predicting that unpredictability with staff and resource, and that is a huge challenge, and everybody's faced with that challenge. You're not alone, especially in your environments, because they can be so unpredictable at times. And what I've always thought about how you do really kind of manage this as much as you can, because you will never get it right every time. It's just the way life rolls, I'm afraid. But what I would say is you've got to get into your data, and if you haven't got EPOS, I would urge you don't need huge expensive tools these days to get management information back out. There are providers out there that can give it you without having a sort of huge terminal or a huge cost, but you need to make your business give you the data to be able to then go back and plot accordingly from what it is that information is giving you. So if you don't get into that data, you are literally just making it up, really, thinking, oh, we sold loads of this, we'll get loads of that out, or whatever, which can be a reality sometimes. If you don't get into that data, that's what happens. And it's alongside people as well. If you've got to kind of go through a year, really, a whole cycle, a whole year's worth of data to be able to give you then the following year to be able to hit the ground a bit easier. But if you don't do that and you don't get into that granular data, then it's very, very challenging. But what I would say is you try your best to build your businesses so you've got a core competence. And that core then allows you consistency of delivery that allows you to build on that consistency with the footfall, that then hoping you are continuing to sort of build your business like Sarah did at Denny, just build it, but then having to backfill that with the casuals is just a reality of what you've got to do, and that itself is very, very challenging because you know, switching those people on and off is not a very appealing way to work for especially young people when they want, you know, cost of living themselves is just becoming very challenging. So yeah, it's getting into the data to give you more chance of being able to plot out the future with actual information. But it takes a bit of time to do that, and it takes you a whole year of your own seasons to work that out. And once you've got that, you can then have those weekly meetings with your staff to say, look, we've got a bank holiday coming up. We sold X, Y, or Z last year. That's the base for this year. Weather patterns, you have to obsess over weather patterns when you're in museums that are defined by the sun or the rain. And you have to say, tomorrow's going to be wet, next day is going to be sunny. We'll expect, because we've got the data, we'll expect 500 tomorrow because it's going to be wet. It's going to be sunny the following day, so we're going to expect 2,500. You know, you have to plot that through, but you will invariably, you know, it is one of the most challenging things to manage. So if you get it wrong, you've got possibly 400 quid's worth of food that you've got to throw in the bin, for instance. So it's hard, it's not easy. I'll just come on to the next slide then, Steve, slide 9, if we're running a little bit out of time. Just on that then, on that slide, while Steve gets it up. Just go next one, that's it, yeah. So you've got to maintain and monitor your food margins and waste. So ideally, you need to make sure that you are costing your menus and making sure that those costings are managed. And that's why I'll put in a sort of tool to be able to help you with that after this session. So you can go to that, a management system that you can work with. Those opening and running and closing schedules will help iron out some of those horrific situations that just you all want to, you know, murder yourselves over, where somebody's left an ice cream fridge open, or, you know, horrific situations that are very manageable if you have these systems in place, these running and closing schedules. We talked about the training and the sequence of service, and then monitoring those wage ratios. You can set your team, you know, a budget to say, look, you've only got 10% of the revenue to spend on front of house this week, and then if they don't, you have to hold them accountable for that. Why? But monitor those wage ratios. Use of technology we've spoken about, and kitchen management tools, and then menu reviews and challenger complexities of service. Again, if you find that somebody's just running away with a vanity project of an idea of a dish that actually isn't making sense because it's slowing service down, or it's costing too much, review it, manage it, and then change it. And we talked about defining what great looks like and the induction. And then challenging the detail. If you have management accounts and you are managing them properly, you might find that lines of expenditure are way over what they should be in terms of consumables. You might be buying thousands and thousands of cups, paper, napkins, that they're all just ending up in the bin, that ends up, you know, costing so many thousand at the end of the year that you can control. If you don't get into that detail, you don't know whether that's happening or not. So there might be savings to be made without having to be, you know, ruthless maybe with payroll or changing menus. Yeah, if sometimes there's costs running away with themselves in that, heat, light, power, all of those things can be switched off to save real cash. So get into the detail, and some processes might be just costing you too much money that you can just change and tweak without it impacting potentially on the visitor experience. So quickly, we've got 5 minutes, but quickly, is your cafe restaurant fit for purpose? And just go down again, Stephen, if you don't mind. This hopefully will give you an idea of what it is that we did to change a cafe down at St Michael's Mount in Cornwall. That their problem that they were finding is that they just couldn't get people through. That throughput was an issue. They just couldn't cope with what the amounts of people on any given day through their cafe, and there was queue problems and 40-minute waits for pasties and so on and so forth, and people were just getting very angry. This model will help when it comes to the peaks and troughs of trade, and I'll come on to that in a bit. But if you could go on to the next slide. So right side, the old cafe that they had was grab and go, and so it's quite hard to look at this, but there's a small servery area in the middle below that building that juts out at the back of it on the right hand side. That was a servery, and then the doors come out of that, the 2 doors come out of that, and then on the right side there was an area of seating, and that was all seating. So what would happen is the customers would come up to those 2 doors, order from the counter, and off they go, and they can go and sit inside or go outside, all with china. So all china, not paper or disposables. But the thing is, they had 1 till, 1 coffee machine, and on any given day could be faced with thousands of people in a spontaneous way. Hey ho, what happens? 50-minute queues, especially out of staycation during and coming out of COVID. So on that left side, what we did, we actually flipped the whole space around from seating to servery. So that left-sided room became seating, which was the servery, and the right-sided space was an island servery, and then on the right side of that, multi-decks. And what we did, we created what's called freedom and a ping-pong theory to break the lines of the queue, to allow people to bounce off areas. And in the middle of that left-sided picture, there was a cake table. Buy with your eyes, and then people could have a bit more freedom and dual service, so they could go left or right of 2 tills, and then they could collect their coffee afterwards. And what this did was break down, and again we worked it through on the sequence of service, to break down queues of people. So what it did was a family would go in, they would all choose their bits and bobs, and then they would disappear because they were encouraged to disappear, and say dad would then collect all of the drinks afterwards, which freed it all up and allowed us to be able to literally watch people just walk through this business. Transform sales, if you come on to the next slide, Steve. Transform, no, one back, transform sales, that's it, that, no, down, that's it, that one. Ping pong theory, multi-decks, transform sales, breaking revenues in the 6 weeks, because we could just move people through. Lots of conversations, lots of talking, please come this way. When it got a bit, you know, busy in there, we could really put through people on this model without having to have too much to do in terms of our own people, staff, because we created a model, and they're out there. You will see them. You will go, you know, Marks and Spencers or Pret or some of the service stations have really hit the ground running with this. They've created concepts that means that visitors, people, customers are doing the majority of the work for you. So this model meant that they weren't all running around with China and all of that table service, and you could manage this space with 4 and get up to about £12,000 worth of revenue with 4 people by just being much more slicker and systematic in the approach. Because it was dual-sided, what this meant, we could on quieter days close one side off. So we could switch from one to the other on any given day when we plotted out when the busy periods would be. So it could close down and then people didn't need to get involved in that other side. So the resource could switch. So from 2 to 4, and so on and so on and so on. It didn't answer all of the questions. So bottom right, there was some key learnings from it. And when it rains, because we were asking people, you know, we reduced the amount of seats. So when it rains, that, you know, there was an issue. They needed more cover outside, which they're going to fix. Controlling waste from production. So they did have year 1 there, you know, it's an unproven model. They did have situations where they were making too many baguettes when they should, or too many pasties or whatever, and it was having to be thrown. But now they've got that data, that it's now, you know, up to them to make sure they're managing all of that and making sure they're not, you know, continuing to make too much, because they're into the data and they're monitoring it much closer. And it did increase packaging, which for some people, you know, is a bit unpalatable in terms of sustainability. But they do have comms where they're telling their visitors that all of it's not going into landfill, it's going back into waste for energy. So Cornwall operates like that. So everything goes a sort of more 360 wholesome way instead of it being put into landfill. So that was the Island Cafe, just a whistle-stop tour of that, because I know we're running slightly out of time. And just for the last time for me, on that right side there, just above where it says adopting a systematic approach, that picture there, I reside in North Yorkshire. That was a museum locally to me. I'll not name them, but that was a classic example, I thought, of how it was really evident that this business wasn't thinking about a systematic approach to their offer, because there was one poor person sat behind that counter, literally doing every single, what we call touch point, serving the drinks, serving the hot drinks, serving the hot food, serving the cutlery, serving the lot. And it was also very leaky, which meant I could sense straight away that people were completely and totally confused about what the system was, because you could access it at so many different points. And it just led to a sort of, straight away, it led to a sort of unease for everybody. You could sense the poor person behind there was trying their best, but because she'd been set up potentially to fail from the start, it was just leading to potential poor visitor experience, really, within that environment. And they can fix that quite easily by just taking away some of that stuff from all of that one place. So things like condiments, take them away from the counter, get it away from your people. Multi-decks, get them away from your people. Ice cream can also be in tubs away from the counter. So it creates freedom. Not everybody's on top of that poor person trying to serve them. And the last part of the jigsaw, which I felt so sorry for, was that person then had to come away from that counter to deliver the food. So that not only just had a huge knock-on effect to the rest of those people walking in, because they disappeared. As you can see, they're not there because they're trying to deliver the food as well as. So adopting a systematic approach and being sensible to your teams about what it is that they're doing, what it is that you can potentially get your visitors to do for you, is a real key to controlling costs. And on the left side, you know, for me, especially in your environments, it's a prerequisite to make sure that you are using local ingredients sourced from not many miles away from your lovely places, and having personality and a sense of place about who you are within your cafe as well, and having fun with your merchandising. Personality is key. It doesn't necessarily matter that it's a mix and match. For me, it doesn't matter as long as it's got personality and there's quirks and there's a bit of fun. It really helps sell the story, and again, I think that's what Sarah did on a bit of a budget, so it doesn't have to cost a huge amount of money to do that. But on the bottom there, keep it simple. Please do keep it simple. It should be the mantra. You don't have to make it complex. You don't need chefs. You can keep it simple, but also deliver a great product. And I think we're just 5 minutes over. I'm so sorry, Steve. It was a bit of a marathon at the end, but I'm so sorry. I hope that helped. But like I said to Stephen, I'm more than happy to take any independent calls, because I know you probably all got very specific things that you're thinking about that hopefully, you know, if it hasn't been covered here, hopefully I can help with.
Thank you, Paul. It's been a long morning, and there's some really useful, really great insights there. So that's been really helpful. I hope the group here have appreciated that as well. I think there's some good bits, and hopefully mixing with the case studies.